Good morning, Facebook friends. We have this week and next week, and then we are done with these chapters in Genesis that we've been working on, which I always think when we get to the end that it went by very fast. So, yeah, I think so too. But today,
go. The little thorn.
Oh, look at your little kitty.
Oh, so cute. Climbs up my furniture.
Good morning.
Yeah. And Grandpa gets after him with a fly swatter. Baby.
It does look like a little one. Yeah. So, Joyce has a little kitten she's showing off this morning. So, well, today we're going to be in chapter 9, talking about covenant. We've got some interesting things. When I say this from time to time, I feel like this is a shorter lesson than usual. And so I'm like, well, maybe we won't take up the whole time. But how many times in all the times that we've been together have we not taken up the whole time? So I don't know. We probably will, because we'll dive deep into something that I'm not anticipating, right? So, but I'm going to get us started this morning with a word of prayer. Holy Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this morning, and to be with the others that have been studying and want to learn more about what you have for us in the book of Genesis, Lord. So we come before you this morning, God, with our hearts open, just anticipating what you will show us through the next few minutes as we just share with each other what we've been learning, the questions that we have. And so we just lift all of it up to you, God. Thank you for being with us individually as we study. I know for me, some of the things that I've been studying in Genesis have really just pointed me to some things that are in my life that you're working on me about, Lord. And I appreciate that, God. I really believe with my whole heart that that's true for others too, Lord, because you work so uniquely in our lives, and we thank you for that, God. So we lift up this time of study, Lord, and we thank you for it, and we lift this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are, good morning, Lisa. I feel like I got to move my phone just a little bit. I feel like my head is too low in the picture. Sorry, then move it down just a little bit. Is that better? Maybe that's too. See, I'm going to play with it just a second, and then I promise I will leave it alone. There, how about that? We're going to be in chapter 9. I had one thing from, hi, it's good to see you. Joyce's daughter peeked in her Zoom box. That's why I'm excited. Yeah. I had one thing that Joyce Heller, after class was over last week, we stayed on talking, a couple of us, and Joyce, I think it was in class, Joyce, correct me when I'm wrong. Last week we were talking about the whole idea in Genesis 8:1 about God remembered Noah. Yeah, yeah, you remember we were talking about that as we were leaving. And Joyce was looking for a commentary note, and then she found it kind of after we were done. But I said, I'm going to share this as we start this week, because I thought this was so important, because I think, in 1 Samuel when we were studying, and Hannah could not have a child, and then it says, like, God remembered Hannah, and I think in Genesis later when Rachel can't have a child, he says God remembered Rachel. I don't know. And every once in a while, I think that trips us up a little bit, because it's almost like, did God forget her and then remember her, or whatever? And we talked about how the remembering is like coming to mind or acting again, or like not a forgetting, but it's time to move on. And I thought Joyce's note was so good, and I wrote down, and Joyce, if you have it and you want to add anything to it, let me know. But her commentary said that the remember is an idea that's like to begin again on their behalf. And I thought that was so great, because it's almost like now, we've talked so much about the waiting period sometimes in our lives with Christ and how difficult that is. And it kind of, in the waiting time, it can feel like he forgot us. I've been there before, where it's like, why all this waiting, you know? But if we really believe in this whole like bara creator thing that we've been talking about, and remember it's been a couple weeks since Genesis 1:1, God created the heaven and the earth. The word for created is bara. And that's the same word in Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God. And so there's this idea of this intentional creation that God is doing in our hearts and in our lives. That's been huge for me in this study. And I think about this with the remember, Genesis 8:1, and God remembered Noah, as if there was this like the flood and this heartache time, if you will, this waiting time, not knowing what God's going to do next. But if we can approach that waiting like as part of that intentional creation that he's doing, right? He doesn't forget us during that part. But then there comes a time after the waiting where God remembers, or in the way that Joyce's commentator said it, he begins again to act on his behalf, as if the waiting, the learning that happened in the waiting that's part of what I'm doing is now ended, and now we're going to act again in motion. I don't know. I thought I'll stop talking. You guys, what do you guys think about that? I've been thinking about that all week and just how important that is and how this all kind of fits together for me. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I have a note in
Yeah.
my Bible that says, this is 8:1 we're talking about, yes?
Yes.
God,
Mhm.
it says, remember does not mean that God forgot,
Mm-hmm.
but that he took action to fulfill his promise.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that it's sometimes we can think that when we're waiting, he's not doing anything to fulfill his promise. But, or when like there's not an action going on. But I think as we mature in our spiritual walk, one of the things that we need to know is that the waiting isn't because he's not ready. Anybody with me? The waiting is because he's teaching something to get us ready for when the action starts again. That's what I think. Now, that doesn't mean that we love the waiting, but I think if we can approach it as this is part of his plan too, then we have a more peaceful attitude about what the waiting is for. There you go. That's what I think, but that's all free. So. They got nothing
I
to say.
agree.
Okay, good.
I think
Yeah.
the waiting is for you
Yeah.
to change.
I think I'm
So that
right,
when
but that doesn't mean I
happens-
think I like it. Okay, so
I
I'm just distinguishing between the two, right? Yeah. So there's so much in the waiting that we don't learn when we're just waiting for the waiting to be over. Anybody, right? Like I just want my life to go on. I just want the next thing to happen, or I just want my life back, whatever. And when we don't ask the question, what is for me in the no, or what is for me in the not yet, or what is for me in the pause, then I think we really miss what he wants to do in us, that creation that he's doing us, because a lot of times that's when we're the most moldable in his image, is in those times of waiting or pause. Oh, and then not knowing. So okay, so yeah, that was kind of left over from last week, but I thought it was just so good. I've just been thinking about that a lot. I want to go through just a quick review on your At a Glance, page 141, and also I wanted to do some like chapter segments. You know, a lot of times we do that when we get later in a study. So if you look at your At a Glance, page 141, I think we filled in we're going to fill in the theme for chapter 9. I think the rest of them are probably filled in. Just by way of a little bit of review, chapter 1 is the specifics on creation, days 1 to 6. Chapter 2 are the details on especially God creating mankind and also the day of rest. Chapter 3 is the sin and the fall, right? That's when all that starts. Chapter 4 is Cain kills Abel. Chapter 5 focuses on Seth and his generations. Chapter 6 is the corruption on the earth, except for Noah, right? Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. Chapter 7 is the flood. And chapter 8 is Noah and his family exiting the ark. And probably you have a few other things along there in your chapter themes, but that's kind of, the farther we go, the more I try to like pare it down and just be like, what's the bottom line of these chapters, right? And then chapter 9 for today is God's covenant. And Noah and his sons after the flood. I just have Noah and sons after flood / covenant. What else does somebody else have for chapter 9 theme? Anybody want to share theirs that might be different than mine?
Can you hear my baby? Can you hear her crying?
Yes, I didn't know what that was.
She's at the window and she's got this thing where she needs to go outside.
Oh.
She's an indoor cat. She's never been out.
Oh.
And lately she's just got this thing where she just needs to go out and she'll cry.
The quarantine is affecting her as well.
Yes.
I just need to go somewhere.
Yes.
Okay, so nothing different for chapter 9 that is different enough that you want to talk about it. I made some segments, like I did some, can you see on this side under the segment divisions? I was just going to share that, and here it is on Facebook too. The segment, under segment divisions. And so for one, I put a line after chapter 2, and I put 1 and 2 as creation. You guys see where I'm talking about right here, under under segment divisions. 1 and 2 I wrote were creation. I put another line between 5 and 6, and I put 3, 4, and 5 were sin and death. And then I put another line between 9 and 10 and wrote flood / judgment of sin. So 1 and 2, creation. 3, 4, and 5, sin and death. 6 to 9, flood / judgment of sin. Any other like logistics, or before we dive into chapter 9, anything else that you need, like review or catch up or something you missed? All right, well, let's look then in chapter 9. We're going to talk about covenant. First, we're going to talk about covenant, and then we do this weird story at the end about Noah being naked in his tent, right? Yeah. Hey, did you guys know that story? Did that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Go ahead, Joyce. Yeah.
It's just weird.
Yeah.
I thought it was weird that they threw that in there.
I know. I think it's so interesting of these like stories, and you read these stories and you know most of them, and even if we've read it before, I mean, I've read that story before, of course, but then when you look at it this deeply, you're like, that story, like, it just kind of feels like, oh, and by the way, this happened too, and you're like, what what does that have to do with everything? And so I think that's the thing about studying, is we have to ask, what does that have to do with everything, right? Like, why is that significant enough that it's in here? So verse 1, chapter 9, we're just kind of going to go through the first few verses, and then we're going to do some cross-references. So verse 1, it says, God blessed Noah. And remember, this is after the flood, after they've come off the ark, after they've done he did a sacrifice right at the end of 8. Am I in the right place at the end of 8, right? When he built the altar and did the sacrifice. Okay. And then God blessed Noah, verse 1, and he tells him, again, we've heard this a couple of different times, but what does he tell Noah? In verse 1,
be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. Yes, repopulate the earth, basically, right? And then we have this changing relationship between Noah and the other creatures, like the animals and stuff. What's happening now?
Fear, terror.
Right, yeah.
He's put that in the animals.
Right, so in chapter 1 in the Garden of Eden, and in chapter 2, probably 1 and 2, there's this indication that the relationship between God and the animals animals, right? And so they're not in competition like that. And so there's this harmonious relationship between Adam and Eve and the animals. But now they have fear. What does it say? Fear. Does it say fear and terror? Terror. Yes.
And fear.
Yeah. And that's I'm not finding it right now. That's 2? Oh yeah, right there at the beginning. Yeah, fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth. Yeah. Those are strong words. Yeah.
Yes.
Terrors. Yes. Let's look at the cross references on page 70. If you guys got that far. And number 3, Romans 8. And so we're asking, like, how do these cross-references relate to the animals, like the discord between people and animals? Number 3, what do we find in Romans 8? Anything interesting in there? A possible connection it's asking?
I wrote that, and I was interested to see what other people kind of gleaned from that. But
yeah.
I wrote that creation is in pain and is anxious to be released and for the world to return to how it once was.
Yes. Creation is in pain and anxious to be released and return to the world as it once was. That reminds me so much of the song, Is He Worthy? Chris Tomlin is the one that probably got the radio time for that song, maybe earlier this year or late last year. But Andrew Peterson's version of the song, Is He Worthy, is my favorite. He's the one that wrote it. And it's about Revelation 5. I always pause, and is it Revelation 4 or 5? I think it's 5. I'd have to check on that for sure. I think it's 5. Where, and it's where John is asking, or the angels are asking, is there anyone worthy who can open the scroll? You know, but Andrew Peterson's song that answers that question, but he says, is all creation groaning? It is. Is a new creation coming? It is. And it talks about, and it's the second coming, where the earth will be in harmony again, like with itself almost, and at peace again with itself. Yeah. So I think as soon as you said that, Laura, it just reminded me of the lyrics of that song. I love that beautiful song. But it's talking about the very thing that you're saying there. In the future, creation will be set free from the slavery and bondage it's into corruption, right?
I found the neat.
Yeah.
I just thought this was neat. I was looking at the Matthew Henry commentary on
Yes.
the whatever that study tool, the online study tool is. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah.
That you get. And he said, man in innocence ruled by love, fallen man rules by fear.
Yes.
And I thought, ooh, there's a lot to that.
Yes. Man in innocence rules by love. Man in sin, if we can say it that way, mankind, right, in sin rules by fear. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because there's this desire in our nature now, I think, right, that I rule, or I have power when I control you, and whatever I need to do to control you, I do. You know, however I subdue you. If I can talk you into it nicely, I will. If I can't, I'll use something stronger, right? And that's kind of, it is, and that is fear. That is fear-based. Yeah, we make so many of our decisions from fear. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, this is a silly little analogy, I guess, but
I doubt that.
You guys with your kitten, you know, I'm not an animal rights person, but I'm very tender-hearted toward animals, and I mean, so I think about people who torment animals.
Yeah.
You know, just even teenagers. You know, kids when they just deliberately taunt.
Yeah.
And I just that was one of the things that came to my mind was that's just part of our sinful human nature. You know, that we have that power over them. So we can be really ugly to them when we don't have to be.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, it's been a while. Yes, it's been a while since I studied this, so I'd have to look at it to like kind of check myself. But when you look at like in the Beatitudes where Jesus is talking about how blessed are the merciful, like that the mercy is what you're talking about. Blessed are those who do not. And this is me talking, okay, but do not exert their power over a voiceless something just because they can. That's like what mercy is, right? When mercy is somebody that says that person has no voice, so I will speak for them, or I will not negatively impact them because I can. I'm not saying that terribly well, but you know what and that's mercy. That's the mercy that that we are to have. Like, it's not listed as a fruit of the Spirit, but you know, as a believer of Jesus, to speak for the voiceless when we have the ability to do so, but also to recognize that we don't harm someone, or you know, especially not intentionally, but even like be aware unintentionally that our privilege does not hurt someone else more, if you will. Yeah, that's what mercy is. How about in number 4 there in the Isaiah passages, kind of along the same theme? What these verses are talking about when Messiah comes to reign on earth. What do we learn from there? Oh, a lot. I hear you talking, Joyce, but I don't hear you well. Sorry. I kind of hear you. There you are. Yep.
No, I think it was that man and animal will be together.
Yes, right. Yes. I wrote down all creation will come together. No, they will not harm each other. From Isaiah 65, I thought there was this neat contrast or parallel. I'm not sure. Animals that prey on each other will live in harmony, and they'll eat plants instead of each other. I never really thought about animals eating each other being like a world in, like what the kind of world that Laura's describing, like this world in pain that's crying for harmony, you know? But I do know, like, we watch nature shows here. We like the Disney nature shows and all that stuff. And every time, like, there was, I don't remember if it was a lion or something chasing like a little antelope gazelle, you know, sort of thing, and everything. I'm like, just run, you know, and I'm like, the lion's not doing anything wrong, I recognize, but I'm just like, run as fast as you can. And they're always picking on the injured ones and the little ones, and I'm like, no. But, yeah, there's something to that I've seen as we've studied this that I've never actually, I'm like, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the order. But I'm like, but it's not the way that it was at first, right? It's not the way that it was at first. Between us and them, between them and them, between us and us. It wasn't ever meant to be that kind of competitive thing.
That makes me think about the circle of life.
Yes.
You know how we talk about that and how we talk about now. One animal will control the population by another type.
Yes.
Yes. And so it gets very complicated.
Yes, it does get complicated. Joyce is talking, I know she's hard to hear. Joyce is talking about the circle of life and how animals control each other and how one animal, you know, there's always like a top of the food chain kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do that too, just in our own like humanness. We're trying to get to the top of that food chain, whatever that is, you know, and that's I think from what Laura was saying earlier, so much of that is motivated by fear. Yeah, absolutely. I wrote down, go ahead. Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
One more quick one.
No, it's fine.
I had written, and I'm not sure whether it was Isaiah 11 or Isaiah 65, but I wrote that the message, excuse me, said neither animal nor human will hurt or kill on God's holy mountain because the earth will be full of God's knowledge. I really like the...
read it again. Yeah.
Speculating about what it's going to be like when the earth is full of God's knowledge.
Yeah.
Neither animal nor human will hurt or kill on God's holy mountain because the earth will be full of God's knowledge.
Because when we share the heart of God, when we have his knowledge, or when our heart is filled like his heart with his heart, then fear is not what motivates us. And we won't need to be powerful over someone else because we won't be scared of what they'll do to us if we don't do something to them, right? Yeah. That's beautiful. I wrote down from Isaiah 65:24. I don't remember which version I was looking in. I will answer them before they even call to me. While they are still talking about their needs, I will go ahead and answer their prayers. This is a little bit different than what we're talking about, but I wrote it down because I thought it was so neat. It goes back to this harmony, though, really, about this connectedness to God. Or I will answer them before they even call to me. While they are still talking about their needs, I will go ahead and answer their prayers. To have that kind of connection with God. I wrote down, too, a time is coming when things will be like they were before the fall of man. That's what all of this is describing, right? This Garden of Eden place to live. So, verse 3 talks about how God gave man every moving thing as food, only he was not to eat what with verse 4?
Flesh with life blood.
Yes, flesh with blood. I don't have a good answer for what that means because all flesh would have blood.
Has blood.
Yeah, I'm assuming the little bit that I read, it meant that there was like the blood needed to be drained from the animal before you ate it. That's the basics of what I understand that to mean.
I saw someplace
go
where
ahead.
they said that they were not to eat the raw blood.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, I don't know why you would, but
yes.
Well, I guess with a medium or a rare steak.
Yes.
You
I guess no more rare steaks, people. No, I'm just kidding.
Rare steaks.
I'm just kidding. No, it was interesting that there's no distinction at this point. Remember, we've talked about clean or unclean animals. There's no distinction here about clean or unclean because that really doesn't happen until Leviticus. But then what we talked about how on the ark he took some clean, some unclean. Remember we had that discussion a couple weeks ago, like how did he know that? But here we're back to discussing animals with no distinction. It doesn't say only eat these animals. It says every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. So to me, I read that, it doesn't seem to, at this point, doesn't distinguish between clean and unclean. So that kind of furthers a little bit of our question mark on then what's the difference between clean and unclean when they go into the ark. So what do verses 5 and 6 say about punishment? Whoever sheds man's blood, what?
Or a man, his life shall be, his blood shall be shed.
Mm-hmm. And because verse 6, why? Why is he so serious about that?
Because they were made in the image of God.
Yeah. Remember, it talked about how Adam was made in the image of God, and then when we got to chapter 5, it went to talking about how Seth was made in Adam's image. But now here, it does seem like it re-emphasizes that all mankind is made in God's image, right? Yeah. Let's look on page 77. I think we did like a chart of some sort, right? Like we had this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I back up for just a second?
Yes, absolutely, please.
Just to the eating blood, drinking blood.
Yes.
I was just thinking that seems so foreign to us. But at first, what came to my mind was, I've probably watched too much TV, but I think I have seen either Indians cut the heart out of something and take a bite out of the heart directly out of the body.
Yes.
Or maybe, I don't know if it's buffalo, or seems like something.
Yes.
Doing that. I don't know if that's factual. And I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that?
Well, wait a second.
Oh, I was
It'll
thinking
come
about
back.
how depraved the earth was at the time of the flood. So to us, that seems, just, we don't do that.
Yeah.
But if the earth was that depraved that God felt like he had to destroy it, then there's no telling what they were doing. And I think later, again, maybe too many movie portrayals, but when they started doing all these false religions and idol worship and all that, there may have been either eating animals' organs while they were still warm,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they still had flowing through them, and people covering themselves with blood, and so.
Yeah, there definitely is. I agree with all that, and that's not. I didn't think about that. I'm glad that you brought that up. There definitely is. There's a respect for that blood is life, and life is the image of God. There's like this connection that God's trying to make, and He's saying this is dishonoring in a different way. Like you can eat it, but don't dishonor it. Don't dishonor me by eating it. There seems to be a connection there. I was just looking in my study notes. This doesn't say anything specific. Does anybody have anything that says specifically about blood? Mine just says, sin did not destroy man as the image of God. God values human life more highly than animal life because only humankind possesses God's image. It doesn't really deal with the whole blood issue, though. Does anybody have anything like that? I'm going to pull a different commentary off my shelf 1 second. I'm going to walk away 1 second. Good morning, Donalyn. And you can see that I'm not wearing my pajama pants. It's not wrong if you are, though. Genesis 6:9. I don't know how much this helps us, but I'm going to read it real quick. No. Oh, 9:6, not 6:9. Like that doesn't seem to speak to that. 9:6. God now permits the eating of flesh from which the blood, the symbol of life, has been drained, and specifically enjoins, what does that word mean? ENJOINS, enjoins blood vengeance. And it says here, no distinction is drawn between clean and unclean animals. Blood vengeance has existed before and does not regard the flood as having significantly altered either God's purpose or created order. Blood vengeance has existed before in Cain and Abel.
Oh.
I'm assuming that's what it's referring to. This just says you can eat the flesh, that the blood, the symbol of life, has been drained of.
Drained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else have? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Go ahead.
The commentary that is taboo in your life anymore. But
That's okay. We just don't speak his name. No, I'm just kidding.
I will not speak his name. But this person says in 9:4, raw blood was not to be consumed as food. It symbolically represented death. No, it symbolically represented, I'm on the wrong line, represented life.
Mm-hmm.
To shed blood symbolically represented death.
Mm-hmm.
The blood of animals representing their life was not to be eaten.
Mm-hmm.
It was in fact that blood which God designed to be a covering for sin.
The blood that God designed to be. You know, this makes me think of something that I read when we get when you get into, like, I don't remember if it's probably Leviticus, but when
it references Leviticus 17:11.
Okay, because there's also all these, like, purification when a woman is menstruating or when she's had a child because of the loss of blood and what you are to do and not do. And I read commentary on that a while back that talked about how that was, like, we've used that for, like, forever, and it was used then too to, like, make women feel dirty because they were menstruating and all this, but it actually had a symbolic, like, the blood that was shed during a period was like an absence of life in the womb, and so it was like there was this purification process, like a grieving process, like it symbolized the death. Actually, the loss of blood is symbolized not a death as if there had been life, but the absence of a life that might have been. Does that make sense? And I'd never thought about it that way or realized that they thought it. So it's almost like once you do this, then we mourn the potential of loss that isn't there, or the life that isn't there, and there's a respect for that. Not that the blood is dirty, but that there's a loss, almost like there's, every time that happens, that there's a loss. I don't know. It goes back to the blood and being significant, as the blood is life, right? Joyce, be patient. Okay, be patient with us because I might have to ask you. Your microphone is really soft. No, it's okay. I just want to hear you, so we might make you say it more than once. Go ahead, though. Yeah.
And I'm up to 100%.
Yeah, I know. There's just something fuzzy about it. Go ahead.
So it's said to join, to unite, that to direct a person to do something, order, or urge.
Okay, and join. How did I use that earlier? Now I have to find it again. To unite. Well, that goes to what we're talking about too, with the loss, like if there's not a pregnancy, right? Yeah. To unite. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I even think
Blood is life.
You don't get, there's a lot of other things we know about.
Right.
But it truly is
Yeah.
our life.
Yeah. 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 If someone is bleeding out, now this goes back to me, Laura, because I watch too many medical dramas on TV. But, the urgency, if someone is bleeding out, is a different kind of urgency than lots of other things, right? Because if they don't get that right away, then you don't live without blood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Donna Lynn wrote something. Women who have trouble conceiving often mourn when they have their period. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of us have been there, I think, too, even if we did eventually have children. It took me a long time to get pregnant with our children. And you do, like, it's just like, it's this sadness because you recognize, once again, I know Joyce is open about her infertility journey, and, there's a sadness every time because you just want it to be different. And so, I think all of those things, yeah. And then you have life. Yay! Because Aaron is sitting in the picture. That's why I'm saying that. So, let's look on page 77. There was these scriptures on the sanctity of life. And this is one of the places where I bristle with precept every once in a while because I think they go beyond having us study and they go on to their agenda. And so obviously precept is I don't know, is that a traditional or a conservative viewpoint about like capital punishment and stuff? So if you don't feel the same way that Precept did, as it was obvious that they did, just, release that, let that go. I don't have an agenda here. No, Donna Lynn says no more duck blood soup and blood and tongue sausage. Is that disappointing to you, Donna Lynn? Because those don't sound like things I would really miss in my life. But but if you would, bless your little heart, I guess. No, but I think it's good to kind of look at these. And when we talk about life and blood, I always like to go just a little bit under the surface too, because in this group that we're gathered around, for the most part, we're not plotting to kill people. We're not drinking blood or killing animals and then eating their hearts. This is not an issue, that we're not disrespecting blood that way. But if you think about the heart of a person, if you will, and the things that we have and do, I was laughing this morning because Matt was packing up his lunch before he went to work, and he said something smart alecky to me. I don't even remember what it was. And I made a move. I had like an itch on my foot. So I lifted up my foot and he backed up and he was like, I thought you were going to kick me. And I'm like, I laughed and I said, because that's what I do so often, is when I'm hurt, I will hurt someone else to make it stop or something. And then I just felt like this Holy Spirit, like conviction kind of, because the reality is, it is what you do sometimes when you're hurting, like, and this was all just in jest. I wasn't going to kick him. He was just teasing me and all that. But sometimes when we're hurting, what we do is we lash out and hurt someone else in that hurt, right? And when I think about this, about not murdering and not killing and not attacking the very thing that gives people life, I want to pause myself and not just overlook this and think, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not going to kill anyone. Because what we do and what we say, I think we have just as much ability to attack the emotional life, in someone else with our words and actions. And so I kind of want to look at this in both ways, because we already understand going into this, we're not to kill people. But what do we do that... there have been times that, I'm not proud of it, but especially with my husband, that I have wounded him and left him bleeding out, if you will, right? And that's real. I have the power to do that, and I have the ability to do that, and we all do. And so let's look at it from that perspective as well, kind of as we go through here. So, on 77... there's just a variety of scriptures here. What are we learning from, like, the Exodus one? Simply says, you shall not murder. The Exodus one at the top. And then the second Exodus one, this was talking about an ox that gores a person to death. Everybody see where I am, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Donna says, our words can be killers. Absolutely. Yeah. Which is why, like, when we studied James, it talked so much about our tongue and the way that we use our tongue and how important that is. So this, anything from like the ox thing that you observed that was interesting? Exodus 21, 28 to 32. It's like the third one from Exodus on page 77. You see where I am there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's down at the bottom here.
It's interesting that an ox that gores a person to death was to be stoned. The ox was, right? But if the ox had a habit of goring, the owner was responsible and was to be stoned. So you're not to keep an animal that hurts people. You're not to keep it, right? What about on the flip side on page 78 from Leviticus? And this is where, like, a man who takes the life of a human being was put to death. Animal for animal, injury for injury, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Mm-hmm. I think, too, I get that. Here's the reality. We have such a corrupt, not everywhere all the time, and you guys feel free to disagree with me, but we have the potential, let me say it this way, for such a corrupt justice system, if you will. There's so many problems with the system of justice, which is why I don't believe in this, like, because I don't, when we cannot be sure, when we make as many mistakes as we do that are proven later, or people are released because, you know, they've been on death row for years and they've been released, when you study, especially in the South, the ways that people of color are treated so vastly different in terms of their presumption of guilt and all of this, then to me, I'm like, this, you cannot pick this up and lay this down in the system that we have, at least here in America, and the reality of it. That's my belief. You do not have to have that same belief. I just know, I've studied and read and know so much loss that has happened because we do it wrong, because the system is broken also. But I yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any, you guys have different thoughts on that, or is this something that you've thought about very much, or in terms of the specificness of this commandment? I'm going to read what, when they stoned the ox, they did not eat the meat, as it would transfer the evil through the meat. Oh, is that what it said?
Really?
Really?
Maybe she read that in a commentary or something. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on that? The whole eye for eye, tooth for tooth. I mean, that's something that's thrown out sometimes and quoted.
Yeah.
I think the situations that are harder for me, and I may have more of a tendency to say, just, you know, let's just have a firing range.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to that, is when there's no remorse.
Mm-hmm.
When someone has admitted,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I'm thinking more about serial killers.
Sure.
Not just a one-time
Sure.
killing, or people who show no remorse. at
Yes.
all. That's when I probably would tend to
Yes.
think, okay, well, if you're not even sorry, you know,
Yes.
if you did
Mm-hmm.
anything wrong with this, or you're not
Yeah.
sorry, you have no compassion for their family.
There certainly are dangerous individuals that have, I mean, I'm not trained in this by any stretch of the imagination, but I can only imagine have deep mental issues that just aren't, that, you know, they don't, there's a word for that, where you have no compassion, where you have no empathy, where you have no connection with, you know, other individuals. You know, which most of the time goes back to the way that they were treated, you know, when they were younger also. And so there's this cycle of brokenness, for lack of a better word, you know, that is kind of perpetual in some situations. But I think the reality is we're all smart people, and if there were easy answers to this, we would know it. You know, I mean, and so what happens is, it's like so many things. What actually happens is you need to be able to evaluate these cases on a case-by-case basis, and have great, and the resources for that are so vast that we can't do that. And then when we make like guidelines and this, then everybody doesn't fall into those, and then people get overlooked, or it gets done wrong, and you know, and that's so tragic. So I hear you.
Well, and I'm not.
I know. Yeah.
Arguing.
Nope, I know. Yeah, no, I don't think you're arguing with me at all. I think it's just so complicated. You know, I think it's such a complicated issue. So, go ahead.
I see Lauren's point. I mean, when you see someone take the Oklahoma bombing,
Right.
for example,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was no doubt that man did that.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
when so many people suffer like
Right.
that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they deserve the same
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our system can't seem to get it right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Yes.
Okay, medium, that's not the right
Right.
word.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. And it's.
Oh, I agree with both of you.
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
the system is so flawed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very hard to do.
I don't even know. Do you guys know? Every state doesn't even. It's state by state whether they have capital punishment or not. Right? Do I understand that correctly? And there are states that do and states that don't. Is that? Do you guys know? Are there some states that don't do it at all?
There's, yes, there are.
Yeah.
And someone just executed somebody within the last week.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't remember what state.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But just, isn't that interesting though? Because even like the same crime in the same country but in a different state or something can be prosecuted very. You know, so even that has some like, I don't know. There's just, it's just because we don't follow the rules the same. The rules, whatever the guidelines. Yeah.
Sometimes it can be 10 years, and the same crime, someone can get 50 years.
Yes. Yes. Right. For the yeah, Aaron's saying that there's a vast difference in how people are even like tried and the time that they serve and all that for the same crime. And in some states, again, this is too much. Too much TV probably, but some states, there's this like if you do it once, it's like one strike, but then other places it's like 2 or 3 strikes or something. So it's just different from different places. So it's a very imperfect system. With a lot of people who are working really hard to do the very best job they can, at the same time. I remember one line from a movie I was watching. This lady was working in narcotics, and she's like, it's like trying to empty the ocean 1 teaspoon at a time, like that's how she described the problem she was up against, in trying to make some difference in this problem in her community. So, how about the numbers? That's about halfway down on page 78. There was a provision. This was interesting. There was a provision for what we would, I think, call manslaughter now, unintentional killing. Because there's this whole like city of refuge idea, right? And so if there was an unintentional killing, a person could flee to a city of refuge and they stayed there till the high priest died. But if they left, they could be punished or stoned or killed for their crime. But if they stayed there, then they would stayed there until the high priest died, which is just like an interesting. So, like, that's why Aaron was saying, like, somebody might go there for a week and the high priest died and they were free. Somebody else might be there 30 years and whatever for the same kind of thing. But
well,
then,
what did the high priest have to do with anything?
I don't know.
That's what I wondered. What did which high priest?
Again,
the one in the city they're in, or the one in the city where they committed the murder?
For the high priest, there would have been one for all of them. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that would be, my guess, I don't even know, this is just me guessing, is because it was something that was always there. And so there would be this, like, change in the high priest from time to time. And so it was something that was just sort of, like, stable. So when the high priest dies.
Okay.
I didn't look up any kind of notes on that, though. Which verse is that when it says the high priest dies?
28.
Oh, it's on the other page. I see that, yeah. Because he should remain in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer, or the one who committed manslaughter, shall be returned to the land of his possession. Let me see if there's anything. What's that? Numbers 35:28. Lisa Wood says, your law and order is really coming in handy today. Yes, Lisa. Thank you for noticing. I've been studying for years to prepare for this lesson. Sometimes it's not good for people to know you so well. 28, 35, 28. No, I don't think mine's going to stay. Mine doesn't say anything extra on that. Oh, I just knocked my Bible on the floor. Ugh. I don't see anything extra. Anybody see anything extra on that? The death of the high priest? I'm kind of just looking. Again, it goes back to in Numbers, it goes back to the blood. The blood pollutes the land. And 33, it says no expiation. Is that how you say that? That means atonement. I had to look that up. That's how I know. No atonement can be made for the land that the blood has been shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
But it's interesting that when Cain killed Abel, he was allowed to flee.
Yep.
And he did that on purpose. So I think that's interesting. It's just popping into my head right now.
My NIV study Bible has a note.
Yes, tell us.
In the Numbers, it refers you to Josh. The final sentence in the note is either an atoning effect or a kind of amnesty was achieved by the high priest's death.
An atonement effect or amnesty was created by the high. We've talked about the year of Jubilee, like every 50th year when the slaves were free and stuff. It kind of reminds me of that. This says the the cities of refuge were connected with that of the Levitical cities. The names of the cities are in Deuteronomy. Remember every tribe, this is later, like in Joshua, when all the tribes got their lands, then the Levites were scattered in all the lands because they're the ones that took care of the worship responsibility, and they were the priests. So there was these Levitical cities. And the purpose is to provide for setting aside the law of blood revenge in cases where the death is not due to intentional murder. If, however, intentional murder is committed, the avenger of blood, which is the next of kin of the slain, must carry out the law of retaliation. The basis of the custom of blood revenge in the ancient taboo on shedding blood is outlined in these verses. The institution of cities of refuge, an early form of courts of appeal, probably dates from the period of the United Monarchy. So it doesn't expand on the reason of the high priest's death, though. So that's the last one. Anything else on those scriptures about murder and how that relates to us today and the blood and all of that? Anything else that you guys thought was interesting on that?
I was kind of curious, wanting to know.
Yes.
What did you say about Abel going?
About what?
Like the person that commits the crime, whether it be murder or accidental, did they go by that person's statement? Was it by a witness? I mean, how?
Very good question. In that, it just like it goes right away to the fact that the system isn't perfect, right? Because the rules, like, there's all these loopholes no matter what your rule is. I've read other places that in order for someone to be stoned, there had to be 2 witnesses, and the first witness to bring it up was the one who threw the first stone. And I'd have to look that up again to be sure on that. But there was a responsibility when you reported the crime, if you will, that you were going to take ownership in like leading the charge kind of thing to fulfill the punishment. And I believe that it says in a different place that there have to be 2 witnesses to something. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Laura.
In Numbers 35, from where we just were reading on the last page 80, it talks about there has to be more than one witness.
Okay.
Doesn't.
Yeah. And so, I mean, let's just say, right, you stumble over a dead body, then it seems like they've been killed, not just expired naturally or something. And then somebody killed them, but nobody saw it, so nothing happens to them. Where, I don't know, there's just all of this. That's why sometimes it's like, well, that sounds good. It sounds good. And it is, if we have all the information and we know what God knows, then it works. But the reality is we don't know what God knows, and as we said earlier, we're motivated so much by fear, and that's so, like, even in the injustices we see in our system, so much of that's motivated by fear, because if I don't control them, then they'll control me or whatever, so I think that's why I read these things and just don't do it. Just don't do this. Like, that's what I want. Like, just don't do this to each other, right? Then we don't have these problems. But let's go back into Genesis 9 then, because we're going to talk about a covenant. God says that he establishes an everlasting covenant with Noah, and that a flood, verse 11, is never going to, again, cut off all flesh or destroy the earth. And what is the sign of the covenant?
The rainbow.
A rainbow in the clouds, that's right. And on 73, we looked up in 2 Peter, let's look at number 2 on page 73. Who is the bow in the cloud for, and what does that do for you? I think it's for God. And again, like, I don't think God needs to remember because God forgets. But it's for God in this, there's this constant reminder. Because in Ezekiel, did we look this up? I wrote down Ezekiel 1:28 and Revelation 4:3. It talks about how a rainbow surrounds his throne. So there's this, like, visual image of, like, I wrote down, I don't remember why I did. I was sent there from something else I was looking at, I guess. Ezekiel 1:28, Revelation 4:3. That it's indicated that there's this rainbow around his throne for this constant reminder of the seriousness of God's commitment to us. And so there's this sense that it's for God, again, not because God's not going to wake up one day and forget that he's, said something. But also there's a reminder for us that we remember God's faithfulness. I always think it's interesting. Like, he says that he won't cut off all flesh or destroy the earth with a flood. Why? I don't know, but we seem to sometimes take such comfort in that. Like, you'll see a rainbow and it says God keeps his promises or whatever. But there's no, like, consequences for, like, our missteps and sin are still very real. So it's not like this. I mean, there's an absence of punishment in this, like, one specific way. I don't know. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes I get a little bit, like, why is it so important to us that God's not going to flood the earth again? Why do we take such comfort in that and ignore sometimes the things that he does do or that we do that bring about, like, personal flood scenarios for us, if you will, right? And recognize that that's, like, our refining process. A second chance, that he's giving us a second chance. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's not this, I understand what you're saying. Like, there's this idea that even when the flood, because I'm always just trying to, like, personalize this. To me, I'm like, when I study the Bible, I'm like, what does this mean? I don't wake up every day wondering if God is going to forget and today he's going to flood the earth, right? Like, that's just not something that's on my mind all the time. I know he's not going to do that. I mean, that's not something that I think about. But what does that mean for me in my life? And that is that sometimes, it goes back to that Lamentations 3:23 that I love that says his mercies are new every morning, right? So even when I do something, when my heart is corrupt or violent, and again, in the ways that we were talking about, as my actions can wound other people, even when that's where I find myself, or not taking care of people the way that he's called me to take care of, there's this understanding that doesn't mean that all is lost, right? That doesn't mean that I'm cut off from him. That doesn't even mean that I have to start over again, right? Because his mercies are new every morning, and as soon as I turn around back toward him, it's like the prodigal son story. When we turn our face back towards our Father, he's already there with open arms. And that's a wonderful thing that is something to dwell on, I think, and ponder and remember about his goodness to us. How about the 2 Peter 3? That's number 3 on page 73. He's not going to destroy it again with a flood.
Do with fire.
But he's going to destroy it with fire.
Fire. I don't know which I'd rather have.
I just want to be gone by then, please.
Me too.
Is that wrong?
Me too. That's what I always think. Well, I just want to be gone by then.
Take me quickly, Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah, everything around us will be destroyed in fire. There will be a new heaven and earth, and it will come and be filled with God's righteousness. And again, that goes back to that statement in Revelation 5 or 4. I'm so sorry that I can't remember, but about that song, like, is all creation groaning? It is a new creation coming? It is. I think a lot of times we know he's coming, but we don't actively, like, not prepare, because I don't mean, like, prepare, like, stock up on things and all that. That's not what I mean. But I mean, like, prepare our hearts for this idea that actually all of this is temporary. I am temporary. My world is temporary. Like, this is the majority of my life, if you will. I'm going to put that in quotes just because I'm like, I know this is my life, but the majority of my existence isn't in this place, right? There's this, like, new creation. There's this new coming. There's a perfect place that he has for us, and that is our home. But because we have such limited understanding of it, and we do fear it in a way, and we fear death because we don't know it, I think we don't look forward to it in a way that we can as believers. I think you can both be happy with your life here, or be glad that you're alive and all that, and look forward to a time when heaven is your home. All right, so then like verses 18 and 19, the whole earth would be populated from Noah's 3 sons now, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham, in verse 22, is the father of Canaan, and this is important because the area that will eventually be the promised land and that the people will go back to after the exodus from Egypt to claim, right, is the land of Canaan. And I don't know about you all, before we get into this like weird part about Moses's nakedness, Noah's nakedness, I had a hard time. They do not, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I guess in my mind I always thought oldest, middle, youngest. But are you guys with me this week that's not the order of, that's not the birth order, right, even though that's how they're listed all the time? Is that what you guys think too? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because Ham, even though he's listed in the middle, is the youngest, right? Yeah. Is that what that's what I was getting, and that's what I was just curious if that's what you guys saw too. And so I just am like, well, why, Moses, did you not list them in order, assuming that he's the one that wrote this? But like, yeah, but there's probably some reason that I don't know yet. But okay, so let's dive into this like kind of weird part of Noah's nakedness. Verse 20, Noah begins farming and plants a vineyard, and then he drinks wine and becomes drunk and uncovers himself inside his tent. I'm really curious, are there other versions of your Bible? What do some of your other versions, how do you describe this in verse 21? He becomes drunk, and what does it say in your Bible? (9:21). My Amplified Bible says he was uncovered and lay exposed inside his tent. Anybody else, anything different? No. I want to read this thing from this Eli Lazorkin Eisenberg that I've been using sometimes. So, a couple of things that I read indicated that perhaps he was sexually abused, and it sent me to Leviticus 18:6-20. In 22, when it says Ham saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers, there's the ancient Hebrew says about Ham that he told with delight, as if he made fun of him, which changes that. Did you guys read that this week too in something? I wanted to read this little couple of paragraphs here because I think I don't know about you all, but I'm like, okay, well that seems like embarrassing maybe, but not, it seems like very significant, and I have a little bit of a hard time understanding why I have. So listen to this from this commentator or author. It's not clear whether the offense was just seeing his father naked, making fun of him, engaging in a homosexual rape, or perhaps, I didn't know this, sleeping with Noah's wife. In Leviticus 20:11, to uncover the nakedness of one's father means to sleep with his wife. One thing we do know for certain, Ham's actions were to be detested. This perplexing passage might be connected to the sexual perverseness that the Israelite culture sometimes thought to be typical of the Canaanites, the descendants of Canaan. I'm going to pause right there. And we've talked about this several times about how the author of this, there seems to be several places where they're writing from a perspective of what they know much later and lifting that up and putting it down on something that happened a long time ago. So if you know about the sexual perverseness of the Canaanite culture, then perhaps this story is written from the perspective of this was sexual perverseness all along, because these are where the Canaanites come from. Does that make sense? The curse upon Ham's son Canaan follows the ancient covenantal dynamic of corporate responsibility, and explains to contemporary readers of the Torah the animosity that exists between Israelites and Canaanites. You follow that? Like, this is, like, here's a source of why all of this trouble. It also predicts by implication a bright shared future for Noah's other sons, Shem and Japheth.
I have here, it's in the Quest Bible, the Quest Study Bible.
Yes, I like that Bible.
Yeah, I do too. And it says about the why did he put the curse on his grandson rather than his own son? And it says they think Noah may have cursed Ham's son with this in mind about they're punishing the children for their ancestors' sins.
Mm-hmm.
Others suggest that Noah may have recognized tendencies towards sexual perversion in Canaan implied by Ham's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like something went on there.
Yeah, I read one thing that suggested that Ham and Canaan may have done this together, whatever this was to Noah.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Yeah. And it says they point out evidence of Canaanite fertility cults
Mm-hmm.
for which the Canaanites were later judged. Amulets portraying exaggerated genitals and other perversions. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
They,
I'm going to look. Lisa,
well, okay then.
I know. Now we're moving into the PG-13 version of the morning Bible study. What do you ladies talk about when you get together? Genitals and sexual perversion and capital punishment. I'm going to go into the, Lisa Wood on the Facebook is telling us that the Enduring Word commentary on this was really helpful. So because my computer's right here, if it doesn't take very long, I'm going to look it up just real quick and see what it's pointing to that might help. I don't know if I read this when I was going through it or not. Became uncovered. Maybe this is where I got some of this. It may be that Noah was abused sexually by one of his sons or relatives. The phrase became uncovered and the idea of nakedness is sometimes associated with sexual relations. This is repulsive but not terribly surprising. Many people who get drunk become victims of abuse, sexual and otherwise. A large majority of the men and women involved in date rape situations were drinking or taking drugs before the attack. According to some statistics, half of all rapes involve alcohol. This is talking about the other costs of drinking too much, which I completely agree with. Others think Ham's only sin here was in seeing Noah's drunken, uncovered state, and that he made fun of him, mocking him as a father and as a man of God. Here's where I got this, I'm sure. Literally, the ancient Hebrew says that Ham told with delight what he saw in his father's tent. He determined to mock his father and was undermining his authority as a man of God. So those are two very different, like, maybe the issue was so big because he made fun of him. Maybe the issue was so big because they sexually molested him or raped him. And I don't think there's any way to know because everything, that we're reading says it could be this, it could be this. There's several things that are options, right? But we don't know for sure. Obviously, this was a very big deal. But then it contrasts like Ham's behavior. Here's the the applicable thing I think that is important. Here's the contrast because one son did something that was repulsive or dishonoring, right? Let's just say that that's true. The other two sons, walked backward into Noah's tent, like with, what does it say, with the garment laid upon their shoulders, walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away so they did not see their father's nakedness. There's a contrast here, right, between Ham's behavior. Let's just say, even if it was only mocking, he goes into Noah's tent, sees him drunk and naked, and he comes out and he's like, oh my gosh, you should see what dad looks like. I mean, it's just that. But the other boys are like, no, that's not how we treat people, or whatever, and they put something on them. They go backwards, they cover him up, and they attempt to save him from further embarrassment of his mistake, maybe. I don't know that that's how the story played out, but there is this contrast, right? And then Noah knows what Ham has done, whatever that is for sure, we don't know. But he curses Canaan and says in verse 25 that he will be a servant to his brothers. And on page 74 in our homework, if you guys got that far, there's this chart of like who Shem was, who Ham was, and who Japheth was. And Shem, the only thing I wrote down on that from this was just that he covered Noah. I don't know. Did you guys write down anything else? I think Canaan, it says in 26, Canaan will be Shem's servant. I didn't write that down, but that could go there too.
I put Shem's descendants were to master over Ham's descendants.
Okay.
Same type.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Same deal.
So one question I
Yeah.
had, it's interesting. I thought that it was spelled out that Ham was the father of Canaan.
Uh-huh.
Somewhere in the reading, in a couple of different commentaries, is Shem considered the father of the Jewish nation? Did you?
Yes, because we are going to continue looking at the descendants of Shem, not Japheth, right? Next week.
Well, and then I got the impression from something I was reading then that Japheth was
Oh, yes.
sort of the beginning of the Gentile.
Yes, so Shem,
Oh, really? Yeah.
Abraham is going to come from Shem's line. And we'll get into that next week. There is in chapter 11, it starts like maybe verse 16 or so. That's where I see that I started marking it. There is a man named Peleg, P-E-L-E-G,
Mm-hmm.
and that person's going to be important because from that person comes like Abraham's maybe grandfather and then father, and then from there that we're going to get Abraham. And I don't remember how many generations that is down. I'd have to look at it a little bit closer. But yes, so Shem is where the covenant will be made with what will become the Jewish people. Shem's line. Does that answer your question? Is that, yes? Is that what?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's,
Mhm.
that's good.
So,
But
go
somebody
ahead.
Said, was it Laura? Did you say that you saw it where Japheth was the head of had something to do with the Gentile population?
I will check into that more. I'll try to.
Okay.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, next week so Ham's line, this Canaan, right, is where we're going to get like the Tower of Babel when we get, because that's in next week's lesson. I'm like 99% sure I'm right about that.
Angie, you
Yes.
were talking about applying this to ourselves.
Yes.
And this was another segment that Matthew Henry, I thought in his commentary, had a couple of very meaningful phrases or statements. He said, as far as Ham and not covering and Shem and Japheth
Yeah.
covering, he said, there is a mantle of love to be thrown over the faults of all.
Mm.
There's a robe of reverence to be thrown over the faults of parents and other superiors.
Mm.
I don't know, that
A robe of reverence. Huh.
Well,
a robe of love to be thrown over the faults of all, and a robe of reverence to be thrown over the faults of parents and other superiors.
it kind of goes back to that mercy that we were talking about at the beginning, doesn't it? There is a voice in that story that is merciful and one that is not, right? Because, what good does it do to kick anyone when they're down? If they've already made a mistake, they're already embarrassed by their mistake. Again, I don't know all the details of this story, but let's just play it out a little bit, right? He got drunk. Maybe he did something foolish. I don't know. He fell asleep. He's naked. It's embarrassing. Whatever. And the two responses in someone's shame, embarrassment, humiliation are vastly different. One says, I'm going to make fun of you, or I'm going to take advantage of you while you're down. Let's just put that on a continuum. At the least, he laughed at him. At the most, he harmed him more, right? And then there's another response that says, you've made a mistake, and we're going to help limit the embarrassment, fallout, damage that comes from this mistake, right? Now, go ahead, Laura. Go ahead. Yeah.
Another statement that he made that I wrote down is, it is common for those who walk in false ways themselves to rejoice at the false steps which they sometimes see others make.
Yes.
And
Yes.
That stung me a little bit.
Yes.
Because I don't know
Yes.
that I walk in false ways.
Right.
I'd have to dig a little deeper on that one.
Yes.
But I thought, I'm sure there have been times in my life when I have watched somebody else.
Yes.
slip up. I thought, well, you should have known better. Or,
Yes.
That's what happens when
Yep.
you do blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
You know,
Right. Yes. Everything from if they would have listened to me, if we're close to the situation, to, yes, like feeling like there's some companionship in it because you've done something similar, right? Mm-hmm.
or smugness.
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Or judgment, right? And I don't know, I'm with you, Laura. I don't know that we're walking in false ways, but every time our heart does that, it should be a red flag that it's a false way choice, that we're taking a step on the false way. Maybe we're not always in the false way, but the false ways tempt us, and we're not spiritually mature on any level if we think we're above that kind of temptation. Every time we take delight in someone else's misstep, that is a form of murder, because we're drinking their lifeblood, if you will. And I think that's challenging for me, to not, there's this competitiveness, there's this comparison. And sometimes it's like there's this fear of scarcity. There's not enough for me. And if you have more, then I have less. And so I'm glad when you have less, because that means I have more, And that's wrong of all of us when we do that. And I'm right there with you. So, not that you were saying you do that. I mean, just it was just your note. Lisa had a question. I got confused when Canaan was mentioned. Was it always the person Canaan? Did it imply the people of Canaan? Like maybe in 26, Lisa, where you're talking about let Canaan be his servants, and let Canaan be his servant in 27. So I think I'm going to say yes. This is without studying it more. I think what I'm going to say is, I think in the curse, like specifically, they're talking about Canaan. But because this is written after this has already happened and the author knows so much more about what it will mean, I think yes, it also means the descendants. Yeah, okay, the descendants. So I think it's both. I think it's specifically talking about this person in this situation, but looking at the Jewish people, it will become to mean like the generations of those people.
Yeah.
Type something else if that doesn't answer your question. But I think that's what you mean. So I will say that I read in a commentary, just because we've talked so much about injustice and stuff today. And isn't it funny, because it's already like, I'm like, oh, I got to finish up. We're almost out of time. And I'm like, I don't know if we have enough to talk about today. Whatever. It says, prejudice people. Oh, I wrote this. So I was led to, when I was reading these verses on like the curse, that these verses were used a lot, I guess, in our country earlier to justify slavery. It talked about how this was that they thought people of color came from Canaan. That's not true, but they would say that this is why that it's God's will for them to serve us or be our servants. I just read that in some commentary, that these scriptures were pointed to a lot by church people who supported the slavery, and probably others too, but I did not know that, so I just wrote that down as. Yeah, I didn't either. So, anything else? Let's see. Ham, I wrote in I'm back on 74 on that chart. He was the father of Canaan. He saw Noah's nakedness and told his brothers with delight. And Canaan was cursed because of what Ham and Canaan, I put with a question mark, because some study notes that I read said that it could have been Ham and Canaan together, like making fun of him or whatever. And that because of what they did, Ham and Canaan, that they would be servants to their brothers.
Just to get away from the little perverseness and stuff that we were talking about.
Why would we want to do that? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, in this book that I will not mention, the commentary, it says...
Okay, listen, Mary Ellen is still using her John MacArthur commentary. That's what's happening today. And Laura. He's a sexist pig.
There is no reasonable support for the notion that some perverse activity, in addition to seeing nakedness, occurred. But clearly the implication is that Ham looked with some sinful thought, if only for a while, until he left to inform his brothers. Perhaps he was glad to see his father's dignity and authority reduced to such weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he thought his brothers might share his feelings, so he eagerly told them, If so, they did not share his attitude.
Well, and even if, okay, let's say I agree and disagree respectfully, not because it's John MacArthur, but but there are a lot of other people who have said that there might, right, yeah. So I think it's all fair to
A
examine.
little bit of everything. Yeah.
But this goes a little bit back maybe to like what I think it was Aaron that said earlier. So let's say he walked into the tent and found him that way. And maybe he didn't do anything, but he did think something. Maybe he thought about something that he would like to do, or maybe he thought about a way that he could harm him, or maybe he had a desire that was maybe not appropriate, whatever. So then sometimes to cover our own, not even actions, but thoughts, don't we deflect and point? So now in order to like cover like my nervousness about this was even my thought process, let's say I'll go outside and I'll point to like what Dad has done, right? To get the attention on that even. And sometimes our mean words or our deflection or our putting someone else down, making fun of someone else, however that manifests itself in our life, is really about, I don't want you to see me, so I'll point you to them. Right? I think that could be a reality of what was happening also. The hard thing is, Lisa is, Mary Ellen, you've been condemned on Facebook. She says, she's shouting, Mary Ellen, all capitals with exclamation points. No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. You know what makes me so happy really though, is that like, it's like, that we come here with like different things and opinions, and I love that. So I think that's great, yes. And I miss that commentary very much because I learned a lot from it for years.
I use it all the time, but when I can't find something someplace else, I revert back.
Mine is still sitting back there because I just don't know what to do with it. I'm like, yeah. Okay, so kind of to finish up then. Oh, Japheth, I forgot to go to Japheth on page 74. I keep getting sidetracked. Japheth also covered Noah, dwell in the tents of Shem. Japheth means may God enlarge. It means expanded or enlarged. So those are the things I wrote down for Japheth.
I had that his descendants would be blessed by God.
Okay.
I'm not sure where I got that from, but I saw something about blessing.
And then the chapter ends with Noah lived 350 years after the flood. So that would be a total of 950 years that he lived. So, what else? Oh, Lisa says to be sure, Mary Ellen, that you know that she loves you.
Oh, I love her too.
Yeah, I think she knows. Yeah. Anything else? We do have a couple of minutes left. That is the end of what I brought to talk about. Any other things in the homework that stood out that we didn't talk about? Questions? Once we're done, I do want you guys to hang on just 1 second because I want to talk to you about the Mark books and what you want to do. But we'll get done first, and then I'll turn off the Facebook and stuff. So, but is there anything else? Because I'm fine to be done. It was I thought it was a little bit of a shorter lesson, actually.
It was.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It did seem to be,
yeah. So that's why we're done with 6 minutes left, shorter day. So. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and pray us out. Holy Father, thank you so much once again just for this time to study and to talk and to just think about how these lessons that so often, Lord, the different times that I've read them, I read them as maybe history or fact or just for knowledge, information. And yet when we slow down and read more about it and we read more into it, Lord, I do see so often, God, how you're really speaking to the things that are a part of my life. I appreciate some of Laura's comments about the false ways, talking about mercy today, talking about how our words, Lord, really can be so devastating, God. And that needs to be something that's so important. It needs to be called in my life all the time, God. And so I thank you just for the opportunity to reflect on that and to confess places that I need to, Lord, to think about my motivation for when I speak and how I share things, God. And so We thank you for this lesson. We thank you for what we're learning from it, Lord. And I thank you again just so much for each other, God, that we can learn from each other in this time. And I lift up the individual lives and homes, the things that people are going through. We don't share all of that here, Lord, but you know it. You know it so well. And I just lift up my heart and the hearts of these other people that are watching this morning, Lord. And I just thank you for being such an active, vital part of my life, God, and for being so at work in things in ways that I won't ever even know, Lord. But I'm confident that you're there. And I love you, and I appreciate that so much, God. So just as we finish this study this week, Lord, I just pray for our schedule, our time with you, Lord, that we can sit before you and really just learn and glean what you would have us to know, God. And we lift all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, hang on one second before you sign off, and I'm going to say goodbye here. Goodbye, friends.